Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. A little interruption today to the final part of our Luther conversation, as my copy of the new Fulgrim novel dropped into my lap over the weekend. And so of course I just wanted to get my review up for you as quick as I could. But we'll finish discussing the future of Luther next time. However, as for today I review the Warhammer 40k novel Fulgrim the Perfect Son by author Jude Reid. For this review I will be discussing themes and narratives of the story, but without anything I deem a specific major story spoiler, so you have been warned. And for this review I read the hardback edition of the book as opposed to an audio version, so I may pronounce the odd name differently to you. However, with that all out the way, let's begin as usual by checking out the synopsis off the back of the book. For too long the Emperor's children have been denied their birthrights. Their once glorious legion has been fractured into disparate warbands, condemned to ravage world after futile world in the pursuit of ambition and excess. But no longer. Lord Fulgrim, ascended Primarch of the Third Legion, the Perfect Son, the Emperor in waiting, issues a challenge to his warriors. Vanquish the Imperial world of Crucible and bring him the head of the Black Templar charged with its defence. But Fulgrim's plans go far beyond the conquest of a single planet, and what should have been a swift and bloody offensive turns into a gruelling siege. With success uncertain, a world in flames around them, and the Legion turning their weapons inwards as well as out, the would-be champions are forced to confront a bitter truth. What must they sacrifice for victory and the favour of their Primarch? And what will be left of them when the war is over? Okay, now, the return of Fulgrim has most definitely been my personal, most anticipated novel in, well, a long time. Probably since L. Johnson's return in Son of the Forest, in fact, which feels like forever ago, despite nothing really happening with him since. Going in, obviously, I had high hopes for a lot of Fulgrim sightings and perspective in this one. However, having read Angron's novel too, I kind of understood there was a chance he'd be a bit more of a bit-part player. And well, it kind of settles somewhere in between the two. We most certainly don't see as much of Fulgrim here as we did L. Johnson in his return novel, but he feels much more present than Angron in his. So a happy medium, if you were. Now, the main character of this one is an Emperor's Children legionary named Marduk Tamaris, who is the leader of a small Emperor's Children warband known as the Perfecti. Tamaris is more or less your standard Emperor's Children legionary, obsessed with perfection, the use of stims, and the thrill of sensation, excess. However, he's certainly not as debased as you might expect, as many of his kin within the Legion are. Indeed, at times his warband could have easily passed for Black Legion in some ways, if you took out some of the more descriptive terminology. So don't necessarily come into this one expecting to see the real extremes of the Legion, as you may be a little disappointed. However, it's not long before Tamaris receives the summons to Fulgrim's Grand Conclave of the Legion, where, as the synopsis covers, he places the challenge before his sons to conquer the Imperial world of Crucible, and thus the story follows the events of this battle. And it's a lot more of a focused view than a wider ranging one in terms of what's going on, specifically following Tamaris's efforts along the way in regards to the Emperor's children. And as such, We get to see his desire and striving to prove himself the best bladesman, to become his Primarch's champion, that arrogance and need for the perfect kill. But in focusing on him and his warband, you don't get the wider context of the battle. Who, if anyone, is in charge? The other legionary forces involved, for example. It's a very focused and isolated point of view. And that's a bit of a shame for me, as I was hoping to see a bit more of how the Legion operates when the warbands reassemble. But you don't really get to see it. Now, one of the particularly good factors at play here though, is Fulgrim tasking the Legion to take out the Emperor's champion, for one of his sons to prove their skill and worth to become his champion, which is ultimately what Tamaris's goal is. And this fits for me. This feels like something the demon Fulgrim would do. You've got your champion, and so I want mine. But I want mine to be a better one. It's classic Fulgrim, and a very similar attitude to the Fulgrim we saw in the Eidolon novel, for example. Which I like, because it feels right. Fulgrim feels as he should. And we get to see the Emperor's champion as a side character in this one too. A Templar by the name of Johannes Berengar. And Berengar is on point as well. He feels like the Emperor's champions that you would have seen before, guided by the God Emperor's light in his actions, and completely and utterly dedicated to prosecuting his enemies. The gruff, no-nonsense attitude the majority of Black Templars possess. And I quite enjoyed the build to the duel between these two main characters, if you were. The alternating points of view, like it was a destined future to come. The battle of these two champions, to see who would walk away the victor. And I think if it had have exclusively focused on that, this novel could have easily gone to a higher level. As again, Berengar for me was a great character. And that's even with it feeling like we've been getting Black Templars in virtually every Space Marine story recently, showing that when it's done well, it absolutely still works. The champion's visions of Rogel are a particular highlight for me. When Tamaris and Berengar interact, when they come face to face in combat, it really is enjoyable. The Emperor's champion versus the Emperor's children. However, we get a couple of other side characters here too. Morvace or Malvace the Sorcerer, a former favourite of Fulgrim's, a man with his own desires and intentions on regaining the Primarch's favour. And he works as an interesting adversary for Tamaris within the Legion. An example of how they all vie to place themselves higher in their Primarch's view. With a clear central theme of this novel being the betrayal that beats at the heart of the Legion, and how Fulgrim can dominate it all at a whim. And I would have been happy to have learned a bit more about the Sorcerer, flesh his character out a bit more. However then, we also have a mortal Imperial captain of the Militarum, named Talith Secunda, and her own struggle for survival throughout the war zone, which, unfortunately for me, didn't really add anything to the story, or grab me as it were, and I just found myself wanting to get back to the Emperor's children, which I was personally here for. And I did end up breezing through a few of her later pages, it has to be said. But then of course, we have the star of the show, Fulgrim. Now, as I said, he's not in this one a huge amount. Absolutely not the main focus, as the title really suggests he should be. But he does still manage to dominate the story, even when he's not on the page. his presence and aura dominating the narrative, really driving the actions of virtually every character and their motives, Secunda aside. However, when Fulgrim is present, the moments he's speaking with his sons, it's by far the best moments of the story as you'd expect them to be. It's these moments that transcend the book in a way, make you think that what Fulgrim is saying matters, that it's going to have repercussions to the wider galaxy. And that's what you want to see, that we want the Primarchs to matter, to be the big players in the galactic narrative, because they should be. That's what they were made for, and there is no one in the galaxy who can compare to them. And though this is very much a standalone story, an introduction to the Emperor's children in a lot of ways, you do get the sense here that Fulgrim is on the path to getting back involved in the real war. And to do that, he of course needs his Legion. He needs them to be that elite fighting force that they once were, the force he taught them to be. And that's what he's attempting to begin here. And that leads me on to the negatives of this one, and that's that the Emperor's children just didn't feel elite, didn't feel dangerous enough to me. This is Fulgrim bringing his Legion back together, and they struggle to take a single world. Now yes, there are mitigating circumstances, such as the Crucible having a powerful shield protecting the fortifications. And again, it's a standalone story which needs its struggle and narrative. But still, they just didn't feel elite enough for me. I can't really describe it in a better way. And that's a shame, as Fulgrim's big return. It's a stated theme of the book as covered in the synopsis. What must they sacrifice for victory? And so having the Emperor's children struggle makes sense for that theme. I just don't think they should have had to. At least not as much. I think a reformed Third Legion should be something to fear. Something that conquers systems, not struggles on single worlds. But again, hopefully this is part of their journey. The Primarch's ambition to return them to that dreaded force. With the World Eaters, it's an unstoppable force and a tide of rage that's just going to flood over you. With the Death Guard, the overwhelming force and power of their Legion that'll weather everything you throw at them, and you just won't be able to stop them. And with the Emperor's children, yes, they are a far smaller Legion than some, but they are perfect. They are skilled without peer. Striking. Again, elite. But they just didn't quite capture that feeling to me. I didn't feel like a squad of their flawless blades is a real terrifying prospect for other Astartes to face. Especially with their Primarch present, even as an observer. It felt like there's no way this force could stand a chance against the Lion or Guilliman, for example. But it should. Again, a reformed Third Legion should be awe and fear inspiring. A major, major problem. Even for the Ultramarines and Dark Angels with their Primarchs. But if Tamaris is the best the Legion has to offer, well, Fulgrim's really going to struggle, as he felt lesser to both the Templar Castellan and the Emperor's Champion in their encounters, and lucky more than anything else. Hopefully, if or when Fulgrim arrives in a main installment of the narrative, to say face Guilliman, then They just feel more lethal. A real true threat. And a second minor negative, I was just a little disappointed to not get any reference at all to Eidolon or Fabius Bile. And that's obviously just a personal hope that I had going in. Yes, both of them want to be their own master, and have moved on to try and achieve that. But they are still hugely important names in terms of the Legion, particularly Eidolon, and to have no real discussion or mention about them at all, when Fulgrim is seeking to bring his Legion back together, to forge it back into being a true force to be reckoned with, I think is a definite shame. Especially when we know Eidolon controls the largest Emperor's Children warband out there, and not only has a hugely complicated relationship with his Primarch, but that he seeks to control the Legion for himself. Hopefully we'll get something in that regard next time, as I definitely think Fulgrim would not allow that to stand. I think in terms of setting the groundwork for the Emperor's Children's big return, as it were, maybe we could have got to have seen a bit more in terms of who the big players are going to be. More of the warband leaders actually interacting with each other, trying to work together. However, all in all, I don't want to sound too negative, as it's definitely an enjoyable read. Again, anytime you have a Primarch returning, it feels special. And when Fulgrim shows up in this one, it absolutely is. It lays the groundwork for more to hopefully come. Again, he is the Fulgrim you would expect. And it definitely makes it known he's got bigger plans to come. And seeing him back with his Legion does feel special. And the Black Templars feel great, true to what you'd expect them to be, and a great opponent for the Emperor's Children. In truth, probably outclassing Tamaris and co here. So score-wise, I'd give it a 3 out of 5, a good enjoyable read. I enjoyed it, and I loved seeing Fulgrim back and in charge of his Legion, his plans for the future, which we'll discuss later in the week. I just personally hoped for a little more in terms of their aura. But again, maybe that's just me building up that anticipation so much in my head. This isn't the end of Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children, it's just the beginning. So hopefully this can be the launchpad, and indeed the crucible, for Fulgrim getting his Legion back on track. Getting them to be that perfect force once more. And indeed, that's exactly what this story is stated to be. But as always everyone, what do you think? A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.